You look down from the high atmosphere, and you see the glowing metropolis of Dubai. A migratory bird looks down from that exact same altitude and sees what appears to be the breaking dawn. But the sun has not actually risen. The sky is simply lying. This is not a traditional story about a city that has merely lost its ability to see the stars. This is a story about nature actively losing its most critical map, and it is happening inside one of the most heavily visited and economically ambitious tourist destinations on Earth. For decades, the measure of a modern city was how brightly it could push back the night. Dubai has mastered this metric better than almost anyone else, but there is a hidden fracture forming beneath the illuminated skyline. As the global tourism market becomes more aggressive, the pressure to maintain an endless spectacle is forcing the city to emit a staggering amount of artificial radiation. This is a documentary about what happens when the infrastructure of human entertainment collides with the infrastructure of planetary biology. The illusion is becoming significantly harder to maintain, because when a city completely monetizes the day and night, the first signs of strain do not appear in the financial markets. They appear in the silent and invisible systems that pay the ultimate price. To understand the scale of the pressure, you first have to understand the economic engine driving this illumination. Dubai does not just light up its streets for basic safety or navigation. It illuminates the very idea of its own prosperity. The city is currently navigating an era of unprecedented tourism pressure. Following global disruptions, the destination has fought fiercely to break visitor records and fill thousands of newly constructed hotel rooms. Every single tower and retail district is locked in a constant battle for human attention. The tourism economy demands an environment that feels alive and vibrant at all hours. Record arrivals do not automatically mean every hospitality business is thriving without immense operational costs. To stand out in a saturated market, real estate developers and hospitality brands use extreme lighting as their primary marketing tool. They transform glass facades into colossal digital screens. They beam powerful lasers from the rooftops of luxury resorts directly into the atmosphere. The streetscapes are bathed in high-intensity light to encourage nighttime consumption. This strategy has successfully manufactured a sense of perpetual energy. But this endless display comes with a systemic vulnerability that is rarely discussed in the glossy promotional brochures. The city treats darkness as an empty void that must be eradicated or filled with commercial messaging. In a real estate market, where every square meter must grab your eye, darkness is viewed as unsold advertising space. This relentless push creates an environment where the night is effectively abolished. And while this might look spectacular on a social media feed, it initiates a catastrophic biological chain reaction, because the light does not stop where the electricity bill ends. It escapes the intended boundaries and spills out into the natural world. The human eye sees a vibrant and successful urban core, but wildlife perceives an overwhelming barrage of false biological information. This creates a profound paradox for a destination built on perfection. The city is spending an astronomical amount of money and energy to create a welcoming environment for millions of tourists. Yet this exact same investment is creating a deeply hostile environment for almost everything else that tries to survive in the region. The pressure to keep the tourism machine running is ultimately blinding the ecosystem. The problem begins with the physical behavior of light itself. When a powerful beam leaves a luxury hotel or a massive shopping mall, it does not simply hit the ground and disappear. A massive percentage of this illumination reflects off the polished glass towers. It bounces off the pavement and shoots straight upward into the night sky. Dubai is situated in a desert environment, where the atmosphere is frequently suspended with fine dust and sand particles. When these artificial photons hit the particulate matter and the moisture in the air, they scatter across the horizon. This phenomenon is known scientifically as skyglow. Skyglow acts like an enormous glowing umbrella that covers the entire metropolitan region and beyond. It effectively erases the natural boundary between the city and the fragile ecosystems that surround it. You might be standing miles away from the urban center in what should be total darkness, but the sky above you will still glow with an unnatural and pale luminescence. This is where the human definition of pollution needs to be completely reevaluated. We are conditioned to think of environmental damage in terms of physical substances. We look for smog in the air or oil spills in the water. We look for plastic waste washing up on the pristine tourist beaches. But light pollution is entirely different, because it is essentially a form of toxic information. It does not poison the air or contaminate the soil. Instead, it actively rewrites the operating code of the natural world. For millions of years, life on Earth has evolved under a very strict set of predictable rules. The most fundamental of these rules is the reliable alternation between light and darkness. If temperature acts as the thermostat of the natural world, then light is the master clock. The rising and setting of the sun dictates when organisms should sleep and when they should wake. The phases of the moon influence reproduction and hunting patterns. The stars provide a fixed navigational grid for creatures traveling thousands of miles across the globe. Darkness is not merely the absence of light. Darkness is critical biological infrastructure. And over the course of just a few decades, humanity has aggressively dismantled this infrastructure. The consequence of this rapid change is not just an aesthetic loss for astronomers. It is an urgent ecological crisis hiding in plain sight. The species that rely on this timing mechanism are currently flying directly into a trap. To see the consequences of this erased infrastructure, you only need to look at the immediate periphery of the city. The Ras Al Khor Wildlife Sanctuary sits within the boundaries of Dubai. It is a crucial wetland ecosystem characterized by shallow mudflats and dense mangroves. This sanctuary serves as a vital resting ground for tens of thousands of migratory birds navigating between continents. Official data confirms that these wetlands are a critical habitat, but they exist in the direct shadow of one of the brightest skylines on the planet. When migratory birds travel, they are pushed to the absolute physical limits of endurance. A single bird might cross entire oceans and barren deserts, using the stars and the magnetic field to guide its way. But as it approaches the final stretch of its exhausting journey, it encounters something evolution never prepared it for. It meets a city that is significantly brighter than the horizon itself. This is where the concept of an ecological trap becomes devastatingly clear. An ecological trap occurs when a species is drawn toward a cue that looks safe but actually leads them into danger. Extensive research on avian behavior demonstrates exactly how dangerous this can be. A large-scale study conducted in the United States found that skyglow is a top predictor of bird migration stopover density. The artificial light pulls them in from their natural flight paths like a powerful magnet. Once they are drawn into the glowing halo of the city, their natural compass is severely compromised. They begin to circle endlessly around the brightly lit skyscrapers. They waste the precious energy reserves they desperately need to complete their migration. The high-intensity urban installations dramatically alter their behavior in the air. Studies have proven that when these massive light sources are suddenly turned off, the birds immediately correct their flight paths and return to normal behavior. But in a city that caters to a relentless tourism economy, the lights are almost never turned off. The birds are essentially held captive by the illumination. They drop in altitude and risk fatal collisions with the very glass facades that reflect the light. Even if they manage to land in the wetlands of Ras Al Khor, they are subjected to constant ambient light that disrupts their recovery. A bird might survive the harshest deserts and the widest oceans, but it can still be defeated by a marketing display designed to sell luxury real estate. The birds are the most visible victims of this disrupted night, but the most profound damage is happening on a scale that most tourists and city planners will never notice. If we shift our perspective away from the towering skyline and zoom in on a single street lamp, we uncover the true foundation of the ecosystem. We find the insects. Insects are the logistical workforce of the natural world. They pollinate the plants and serve as the primary energy source for countless other species, but they are tragically sensitive to artificial light. When a moth or a beetle encounters a glowing street lamp, it is hit with a neurological short circuit. The insect will abandon its search for food. It will stop looking for a mate. It will cease laying eggs. It will simply fly in endless exhausted circles around the bulb until it dies of starvation or is eaten by an opportunistic predator. The light creates a biological vacuum that sucks the life out of the surrounding environment. A rigorous field study conducted in the United Kingdom revealed a deeply concerning metric. The researchers found that street lighting reduced the abundance of moth caterpillars by 47% in hedgerows and 33% in grass margins compared to unlit areas. While these specific numbers were measured in Europe, the biological mechanism applies universally. When you place hundreds of thousands of intensely bright bulbs in a desert environment, you are actively draining the insect population. This initiates a dangerous ripple effect throughout the entire food web. If the insects disappear, the bats and the small birds lose their primary food source. The predators that rely on those small birds are forced to migrate or starve. The pollination of local flora is severely reduced. The relationships between species are fundamentally restructured by nothing more than misplaced photons. If a city suddenly lost half of its night shift workers, the economy would not collapse in a single day. It would simply function a little worse each night, until a critical service quietly failed. The same principle applies to the natural food web. The ecosystem does not explode, it simply fades into a biological silence. And this silent erosion is not confined to the land. The tourism industry of Dubai is intimately connected to the ocean. The coastal waters are central to the city identity and its economic appeal. Luxury yachts glide through the harbors, while underwater restaurants and illuminated beaches draw millions of visitors. But the effort to decorate the water introduces the light into a completely different physical medium. When you look out from a hotel balcony, the light appears to stop at the surface of the sea. But if you look from beneath the surface, that is exactly where the invasion begins. Water transmits light differently than the air. It acts as a lens that can carry the artificial signals deep into the marine environment. A groundbreaking global atlas modeling artificial light at night under the sea provides a sobering estimate. The model indicates that in the portion of the Persian Gulf belonging to the United Arab Emirates, biologically significant light could penetrate past a depth of 10 meters across roughly 79.5% of the modeled area. 10 meters is roughly the height of a 3-story building. This means that a vast expanse of the shallow coastal ecosystem is bathed in unnatural light. This is not just a cosmetic issue for the fish. Marine life is heavily dependent on the lunar cycle and the subtle shifts in natural light. Microscopic zooplankton time their upward vertical migrations based on the fading of the sun to safely feed under the cover of darkness. When the surface is flooded with urban light, the plankton stay hidden in the depths. This deprives the small fish of their food. The coral reefs rely on specific light cues to coordinate their massive spawning events. Artificial light can cause them to spawn at the wrong time or fail to reproduce entirely. The apex predators find their hunting grounds permanently illuminated, altering the balance of survival. The city is effectively broadcasting a false daytime into the ocean. It is an unintentional consequence of a tourism model that demands constant visual stimulation. We measure the safety of human swimmers and the aesthetics of the waterfront, but we completely ignore the fact that we are projecting an alien environment into the sea. The realization that light reaches deep into the ocean brings us to a much larger economic contradiction. The destination prides itself on extreme efficiency and technological advancement. Smart city initiatives track energy consumption and optimize traffic flows. Every aspect of the urban experience is heavily measured and managed. Yet one of the most pervasive forms of pollution is barely quantified in the official sustainability reports. Why does a city that measures almost everything fail to measure the light that is escaping its borders? The answer lies in the fundamental philosophy of urban economic development. The true villain in this story is not a single engineer or a specific corporation. The villain is the deeply entrenched value system of the global tourism and real estate market. In this system, light is universally equated with safety and prosperity. A dark building is perceived as empty or failing. A dark street is viewed as a threat to the consumer experience. The pressure to maintain high hotel occupancy rates and retail sales dictates that the environment must always feel active. This creates a negative feedback loop of illumination. If one retail district installs a brighter LED screen, the neighboring district must increase its own lighting just to remain competitive. This visual arms race leads to a staggering amount of wasted energy. A lighting system can be perfectly efficient in its electricity use and still be an ecological disaster if it is pointing in the wrong direction. The light spills horizontally across the water and blasts vertically into the sky. It uses harsh blue and white spectrums that are incredibly disruptive to both human and animal biology. This is the hidden cost of the endless economic expansion. The tourism pressure demands an immaculate stage for the visitors. But the maintenance of that stage requires pushing the natural limits to the absolute brink. This brings us to the psychological climax of this investigation. When we think of environmental disasters, we usually look for dramatic visual evidence. We look for the smoke of a forest fire or the devastating aftermath of a flood. We expect a clear starting point and a definable moment of tragedy. But the crisis of artificial light has no such defining moment. There is no single morning that will be officially declared the day the ecosystem collapsed. There are no sirens and no emergency broadcasts. The hotels will remain open and the tourists will continue to arrive. The financial markets will report the quarterly earnings without any mention of the missing insects. The restaurants will serve food and the digital billboards will loop their advertisements. The disaster is entirely silent. It is just a few birds altering their migratory routes. It is just a few marine species failing to reproduce at the correct time. It is just a subtle shift in the food web that no one bothers to quantify. The invisibility of this threat is exactly what makes it so profoundly dangerous. It allows the planners and the developers to simply ignore it. They can point to the bustling airports and the packed shopping malls as proof that the system is working perfectly. But perhaps the city has not actually defeated the limits of nature. Perhaps it has merely masked the symptoms by pushing the consequences onto the species that cannot complain. The illusion of perpetual day is purchased at the direct expense of the biological infrastructure that surrounds it. This vulnerability cannot be paved over or outspent. It is essential to acknowledge the practical reality of modern human existence. No reasonable person is demanding that a global metropolis completely turn off its power grid. A city of this scale absolutely requires lighting. The aviation sector needs runway lights for safe landings. The highways require illumination to prevent fatal traffic accidents. The public spaces must be lit to ensure the safety of residents and the millions of tourists wandering the streets at night. The economic activity of the night shift is a legitimate and necessary component of modern survival. The debate is not a simplistic battle between light and darkness. The actual conflict is between necessary illumination and reckless spillage. It is the difference between light that serves a crucial human function and light that exists solely to demand attention. A truly smart city is not defined by how many bulbs it can simultaneously power. It is defined by knowing exactly where those bulbs are completely unnecessary. The technology to solve this problem already exists and is highly accessible. We can implement intelligent shielding to ensure that light only points downward onto the pavement where it is needed. We can map the sky glow across different seasons and adjust the outputs accordingly. We can change the chemical spectrum of the LED lights to warmer amber tones that are far less disruptive to wildlife. We can establish mandatory dark corridors along the coastline and around the sensitive wetlands to give the migratory birds a safe passage. We can use advanced motion sensors to dim the lighting during the late hours when the tourist foot traffic has naturally subsided. These are not impossible engineering challenges. They are relatively simple adjustments to urban policy. The true obstacle is not technological at all. The obstacle is a stubborn mindset that refuses to acknowledge darkness as a valuable resource. The conflict is whether the tourism industry is willing to sacrifice a small fraction of its visual spectacle to preserve the integrity of the natural world. And unfortunately, the economic incentives currently favor the spectacle. While Dubai serves as the most intense and visible example of this phenomenon, it is far from alone. This specific crisis is playing out across the entire planet. Every coastal city that uses its illuminated skyline as a branding tool is participating in the exact same biological disruption. From the resorts of the Caribbean to the massive port cities of Asia, the night is being systematically erased. The pressure to attract global capital and international visitors has created a universal template for urban design. This template prioritizes immediate human convenience over long-term ecological stability. It is a global experiment in sensory deprivation for the natural world, and it forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about our own immediate surroundings. How much of the artificial light outside your own window is actually serving a practical purpose? How much of it is simply shooting into the sky, bouncing off the clouds, and blinding a creature that has no ability to turn it off? We have convinced ourselves that more light always equals more progress, but we are slowly discovering that our relentless pursuit of visibility is making us blind to the damage we are causing. The natural world is not demanding that humanity retreat back into the caves. It is not asking for a complete and total blackout of the global economy. It is simply asking for a reasonable boundary. It needs a few hours of true darkness for the insects to leave the street lamps and return to the soil. It needs a shielded corridor of night for the migratory birds to safely navigate the continents. It needs a darkened coastline so the marine life can maintain its ancient rhythms. Dubai built its towering reputation by transforming the harsh desert into a beacon of endless possibility. It proved that human ambition could overcome almost any geographic limitation. But as the environmental pressures continue to mount, the city may eventually realize a harsh truth. The most valuable asset for a sustainable future is not the incredible amount of light it has managed to generate. The most valuable asset is the natural darkness it no longer knows how to restore. This video is an analytical documentary based on publicly available data, published scientific research, and environmental modeling at the time of production. The biological mechanisms discussed regarding avian, marine, and insect behavior are supported by established global studies and are used to illustrate potential ecological risks. The specific data regarding marine light modeling in the region represents estimated projections rather than complete direct measurements of all coastal areas. This content analyzes urban planning, tourism, economics, and environmental systems, and is not intended to defame any specific individual business or government entity. The conclusions drawn are based on the synthesis of these scientific and economic principles. If you value investigations that look beyond the glossy marketing brochures and dive deep into the invisible systems that actually sustain our world, please subscribe to the channel. The most important warning signs are rarely found where the tourism campaigns want you to look.